So, we are doing a new series, okay? So, new message series, Anatomy of Sin. But you know what? It's gonna end up being called the Beanbag series because there's a video in each of these that guess what? There's a beanbag in each of them, right? So, we're gonna be talking about sin, which seems like a very antiquated term, but interestingly, its synonym, evil, somehow doesn't seem as antiquated. Okay, and we're going to explore not the evil out there, because man, there's a lot of evil out there, but how sin enters our hearts, and which ends up being the starting point to actually do something about the evil out there. So when we study the Bible and understand the subtle pathways that sin takes a hold of us and how susceptible we are, ultimately that actually humbles us, and it gives us hope at the same time, because then we can understand how we can struggle against sin's destructive power. So, what is sin? One simple understanding of sin is that it is the immoral choices that we make. Like, you wouldn't call it sin if it were an accident. So, it's something we choose. The bad choices, the immoral choices we make. That's why we have a criminal justice system, okay? And that holds people accountable for their actions. And just other story, when my son was 3, he came back home one day and he said, Mommy, if you do bad, you lose your job. And so Jackie's like, who told you that? And he's my teacher. So we're like, okay, I guess they're teaching him consequences and things like that, okay? But it is based on this fundamental assumption that you do choose to do what you do. Your choice. And then there's consequences that we're going to hold you accountable to, all right? But at the same time, when we reflect on our sins, there's something else there. Like the choice to indulge in our anger, to just let someone have it, right? Or the choice to get into some dark stuff on the internet. There is this sense in which we kind of feel enslaved by it. Like we end up doing things that we don't want to do. We feel addicted to it. So isn't that true of our experience? Like, so which is it? Is it choice or is it enslavement? Is it just us or is there something else? And actually the Bible's understanding of sin, it is really sophisticated in its understanding of evil because the Bible places responsibility squarely on you. It is you. You chose it. But it's not simply a choice. You do choose the evil that gets unleashed, but at the same time, the evil that gets unleashed, it's not simply a sum of its parts. For example, you do something bad, right? The top row. You do something bad, and then you do another bad choice. It's not just two bad choices. What often happens as a result is you do the bad, and then you do the other bad, and then there's something like a spiraling downwards. And then there's just this chaotic mess. And it almost seems like there's something else that got added in there. Something plus something, and then this mysterious other thing gets added. So anger. It's not just the person who possesses anger and expresses it. As you express that anger, somewhere along the way, the anger possesses you. Somewhere along the way, you're no longer the person who simply was drawn to sexual sin. You're now helpless, sort of like just dragged along. And in Genesis 4, the story of Cain and Abel, God says to Cain, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Sin is depicted as this predator crouching at the door. In other words, sin is like this external force that has a will of its own, a desire of its own, that is contrary to yours, that can actually overtake you. But at the same time, you do have a choice. Like, you don't have to open the door. So you want to tell that person behind that, what do you want to say? Don't open it. Don't do it, right? Don't open that door. That's the approach that God makes towards Cain. And then it's a plea to Cain, actually. So this is a very sophisticated picture of sin in the Bible. So now we're going to watch episode 1 of the video, which depicts this dynamic. It's this cool animation style, but it's an old video that we actually remastered and by AI. But don't get distracted by all of that. Try to pay attention to some of the words, okay? All right, so some things that maybe you guys talked about. One thing that was interesting was the whole, I don't even know if we should be calling it evil. Maybe something like evil or my bad, or how about even just normal, right? And it's that whole pathway, right? And it's it's not such a big deal, right? It's not that big of a deal. Why are you making such a big deal about it? Why are you judging me? Right? It's all of those moves. So I'm just gonna touch it. I'm just gonna touch it, right? And that's how it all starts. And so I think I'm going to talk about a couple of these things, and I think one of the ways that Richard, so this is Richard, he actually leads our church in North Carolina, so if you see him at like Acts 2 Winter Conference or something, you'll be, oh yeah, I saw you at that video, right? So he gets that a lot, beanbag video and stuff. So he made this a long time ago, but it's one way that he justifies getting closer and closer to the beanbag and eventually just fully sitting in it and just immersing himself in it is that he wanted to know. I want to know what it is so that I can discern. Hey, I think, I need to understand this more so I can better discern the whole thing. So how do you gain that knowledge and that wisdom or discernment? By personal experience, of course. And personal experience, it leads to knowledge. And that is one of society's strongest messages when it comes to this issue. And it is this idea that if you have not experienced it, then you are so naive. You're just a child. And this is a theme of pretty much all coming-of-age movies. Like, it's this idea that when you cross boundaries, most often sexual boundaries, then you finally become mature. You become wiser. What's actually kind of profound is this is the essence of temptation in the Garden of Eden from Genesis. First book of the Bible. The serpent doesn't say, hey, Eve, eat that fruit so you could be evil. No, the serpent actually says, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So sophisticated. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was the desire to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. So it's interesting that the appeal of sin was that it would make you wise. It's this idea that sin leads to wisdom. If you think about it, it doesn't make any sense. Like, why would crossing a boundary lead to wisdom? Yet, this whole, don't you want to be wise? Just try it. It's so compelling to us. And I think about just the whole message of college, right? College messaging. You're supposed to go to college and throw off all moral boundaries and have this experience that you were previously forbidden. And when you cross that boundary, when you have that forbidden fruit, it's supposed to make you wise. Is that true, though? Like, do you need to drink poison in order to know that it kills you? Like, I guess you do gain some kind of knowledge through transgression. Like, let's say you wonder what it's like to cross a certain sexual boundary. Or you wonder what it is like to just finally let your friend have it, curse out your friend. Like, it would be so cathartic. And let's say you did that. You crossed that boundary. You curse out your friend. And now you know what that's like. Now you know what it's like to curse out your friend, and you've gained that knowledge. Like, do you understand human sexuality any better? Do you understand friendship any better? Have you gained wisdom for friendship and life? Or is it the case that in the process of gaining that experience, you ended up losing something more? Like, you end up losing a more important wisdom. You want to say to the guy, like, man, you're a genius. You got what you wanted, but you lost what you had. Genius. The experience of sin, it does teach you something, but it comes in the form of regret. Or maybe it teaches you something else. It teaches you the loss of dignity. It also gives you that knowledge as well. Is that something that you want to learn? C.S. Lewis, he puts it this way. One who knows the power of the wind is someone who resists it, not the one who gives into it and lets the wind carry him. It's not the one who gives himself to sin that knows the power of sin or knows what it is, but the one who resists it, who understands the power of sin better. I think another insight from the video that maybe you guys talked about is the slow progression of sin. Richard says, oh, I want to just take a look. I want to get a closer look so I could, I want to get a little closer so I could take a look. And then you touch it, and then, oh, I'm okay. And then you sit in it. And all along the way, you notice that he's justifying the next step. Oh, okay, now that I'm here, the next step is not that bad. Because the next step is always, by definition, a small, easy next step. So we need to really understand nobody jumps straight into sin. Everybody takes incremental steps. So just think about some sin or addiction that plagues you with some kind of shame or guilt, even to this day. And if you think about that, think back to that. How did you get to that point? Like, what were the steps? People, they don't just wake up one day and say, you know what, today I'm just going to jump into sin, do something that I will regret for the rest of my life. They don't say, I'm going to get myself addicted today. That's what I'm going to do. No, there are a lot of tiny, incremental, sometimes almost invisible steps. So to illustrate this last point about incremental steps, I want to turn to a scenario in the Old Testament, story of Lot, Abraham's nephew. And this is in Genesis, and the context is God has called Abraham into his promised land. Abraham does go out. He brings Lot, who is his nephew. And they're out there, Abraham and Lot, and they have all their livestock, and they are living this nomadic lifestyle. They actually end up doing pretty well, and they get pretty wealthy. And when they get wealthy, actually their relationship starts to get sour because wealth, right? That happens a lot even to this day. So their flocks get so large, their herdsmen and shepherds, they start to have like tension. They compete for the same limited resources, the grazing land, things like that. And then Uncle Abraham approaches nephew Lot and says, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I'll go to the right. And if you take the right hand, then I'll go to the left." And so Uncle Abraham gives Lot first dibs. He really didn't have to do that. It was his right. He's the uncle, right? And then we read what Lot did. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered, and everywhere like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zor. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. And the most tragic line, thus they separated from each other. So he lifted up his eyes. He saw, whoa, that's lush, valley, green. And it's like a flashback to Eve, he chose for himself. So his eyes saw. And then what he does, he separated. Moving on, Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. So Lot, he chooses the better land, and he moves towards Sodom, where it says there were great sinners against the Lord. And you can imagine, as he is departing from Abraham, Lot, he's like gathering up all his livestock, and as he moves towards that valley, that lush valley where Sodom is, maybe you can imagine, maybe there's some bounce in his step. Man, I got all this. I made the better land. I made the right move. And maybe a few chapters later, what we find, though, is that Lot, he actually is drunk. And he's living in a cave, having fathered children through his daughters. It's a mess. How did he get there? It started here with a very small step of lifting up his eyes, evaluating what looks better. And then he separates from Abraham, whom he knows is walking with God. So it's interesting. What does he do? It says he moved his tent as far as Sodom. So that means he's still living as a sheep herding nomad. He's still outside Sodom. He doesn't live in Sodom, not yet. Pitches his tents there, slightly outside, up to the boundary line of Sodom, but near Sodom, near the beanbag, just to see. Should that have been a red flag? I think so. That should have been a question. This should have been raised a red flag for him. And eventually, he ends up living in Sodom in chapter 14. By the time it's chapter 18, he's one of the leaders of Sodom. He lives in the gateway. That's where the leaders hang out. If you think about it, why did he move into Sodom? Because didn't he choose the land near Sodom because of what? Livestock. He's supposed to live around, right? Better grazing land for his livestock. Why did he move in? Seems like those motivations to go near Sodom. At first, it's better grazing land, but eventually he sells his livestock and he's just living right in there. And this is a really interesting question that this raises. When Lot first chose in this chapter to move near Sodom, did he know that he was going to eventually move into Sodom? Did he know at that time? Was that his intention? Did he know it? And the answer is actually pretty complex. There's a sense in which he knew, and there's a sense in which he didn't know at the same time. There's a very strange phenomenon that happens in all of us because nobody jumps straight into sin. Nobody jumps straight into Sodom. Most of us, We would be way too ashamed to actually do something that drastic and obvious like that, to just move right in there. Instead, what do? We place ourselves in situations where you can be tempted. We go near it. If people ask, wait a minute, why are you moving in that direction? Why are you doing that? And are you going to commit these sins? Are you going to fall? And your answer would be, no. What are you talking about? I'm just near it. Doesn't mean that I'm actually going to do it. So like a person who has an affair, right? Who commits adultery. Never meant for that to happen. It starts with something like, my wife is away and work meeting ended early one day, and I'm just going to grab an early dinner with whoever's around. It's, happens to be with this attractive coworker. And during dinner, she smiles, and I just smiled back. That's how it started. It was very innocent. Really? Innocent? Yeah, it was innocent. So I don't know, it's really complex. And it's a complex psychological thing. Did you know where this was headed? And that person would say, no, with a lot of conviction. No, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Okay, then what? When did you know? When do you think someone like that would know where this is headed? Another example, how about someone who grew up in church, comes to college, and she finds herself attracted to the whole college scene that she's seen in movies. Supposedly makes you wise. Wonders what she's been missing out on. But she's not going to go and seek out sin, right? It's just she's going to hang out with a certain crowd. And she just says, I just feel closer to them. That's all. I'm not going to do what they're doing. That's not my intention. And most of us don't really have the stomach to go out and look for and find sin, right? But the truth is, we place ourselves near sin and hope that sin finds us. Everyone says it started innocently. So just think about some sin that you struggle with. Think about how it all started. It always starts with just one click, one visit, one sip. But when it started, did you know where it was headed? I don't know. In one sense, I think we do know. When we pitch a tent near Sodom, we do know something. It's just that we force ourselves to not know. And eventually, that becomes true. We don't know. We say, that's not my intention. We keep telling ourselves until we become innocent in our own eyes. And there is this built-in need to play this charade with ourselves so that we can turn a blind eye to our own dark desires. So we have to be careful. You got to be really careful. What are you drawn by? What is the Sodom that draws you? That you could say it's not sin, but you're getting close to something you shouldn't get close to. Those incremental steps, just ever so close. Contrast that with Abraham's direction. After Lot leaves, it says Abraham moves his tent to the oaks of Mamre, and he constructs an altar to the Lord. So Lot takes the lush valley, he gets the not lush high place, right? So he goes up to the high country, constructs an altar to God, and I just love this picture. And God comes to Abraham, and he says, wow, you've chosen me. I'm your reward. Lot didn't choose the best. You chose the best. And I think he's right. I think God's right. In the end, there is judgment. There's an actual authoritative voice that says, Lot, you've chosen poorly because Sodom is actually destroyed. And all that Lot has invested in, it goes up in flames. And what is really telling and tragic is that even after all that, Lot still doesn't repent. He doesn't return to Abraham. He ends up living a tragic life in a cave. And I think this is a testament to the power of temptation to slowly draw someone in and destroy them. It is that powerful. It is scary powerful. So that's why the Bible tells us, flee from temptation. In the Lord's Prayer, Jesus tells us to pray in that way. It says, lead us not into temptation. Why? Because it is way more powerful than we think. And when people say, oh, you're playing with fire, and, don't do it. And it just sounds so patronizing, right? You don't think I can handle some little fire? Except right now, man, we don't say that now because we know how a little fire can spread in SoCal, right? And grow. So, man, it has a mind of its own. It's so powerful. And it could be crouching at your door, and its desire, it's against you. It has its own mind and desires and momentum that will carry you. So we make a myriad of small choices as we live life. We can either flee from sin, get as far away as we can, or listen to those, oh, it's not that bad. Kind of get a little bit closer, take one step closer to sin, see where that lands. So it's the small choices when things are very unclear and undefined. When it's like that, that actually we see what people are made of. And, with Lot, right? It's kind of not clear right now because he's offered this. Yeah, he kind of, his uncle did say, you take first choice. But could he have chosen differently? I think so. He made that choice. And we see what he's made of. We see what's really in his heart eventually. And then with Abraham, we see what he's made of, right? The way he chooses in that very uncertain situation. It's in those moments when it's not so clear, when things are kind of ambiguous, that we can actually not just see people's convictions, but form our convictions. It's a new quarter. We're trying to do a lot of new things, youth, we're going out to do some youth outreach in Pomona, and we're trying to there's a lot of service opportunities, and you have a lot of opportunity to do choices. And that's when you can find out what you're made of, what your convictions actually are. And yeah, it might be hard to make those small choices, but what helps is to do what Abraham did. Man, he made it personal between him and God. Went up that high place, built that altar to the Lord. Like when you find that it is hard to make those small choices that seem like, I'm not sure if there's consequence, it's just, you're not sure about that. To say, oh man, it's for God. Why? Because God made the hard choice for us. Jesus in Luke 9, he resolutely set out for Jerusalem, where the cross lay before him. He set his eyes in that direction. And as he is hanging on the cross, he too would look up. And what would he look at? He was looking forward to that day, for the joy set before him, Hebrews 12, where one day he would wipe away all of our bad choices. He's looking forward to that. So as you think about that, as you think about the kind of choices that you need to make, and as you understand your own heart, man, I think there's two ways in which you need to apply this. One is to really understand the anatomy of sin and how it works in you, and to not be self-deceived, but then to look towards Abraham and go, in those difficult moments, can I make the right choice? Can I actually form my convictions in a stronger way? So I'm going to give you guys a couple minutes. Think about these questions that are also on your handout. Think about your past. Which self-justifications do you end up using the most? Which were these? And then what are some steps you can take to move in the other direction? Give you guys a couple minutes to think about that for yourself, right? Start to pray, and then we'll have a time to respond.